Class defines the data and behavior of a type, like a blueprint. Must have at least one method and one field. Member represents the data or behavior of a class or struct. In other words, field, property, method, constant, event, etc. Variable, word storage location that holds a value. The data type and name must be declared in a statement, must be explicitly declared before use, and uses camel case notation. Method, a code block containing a series of statements. Takes an input, performs some action, and sometimes produces an output, something an object can do. Field, variable of any type declared directly in a class. Should be private or protected and store data needed by more than one method. Property, a member that provides read and or write access to a private field. Contains get, set, accessors. Access modifier, keyword used to specify the declared accessibility of a member or type, such as public, private, protected. Public, keyword with the most permissive access level. There are no restrictions on accessing these members. Private, keyword with the least permissive access level. Members are accessible only within the body of the class or the struct in which they are declared. Internal, keyword where members are accessible only within files in the same assembly. Default for class or methods that have not been declared public. Protected, keyword where members are accessible from within the class in which it is declared and from within any class derived from the class that declared this member. Constructor, class method that has the same name as the class, is executed when an object is created and can set default values for the object. For, executes a block repeatedly until a specified expression evaluates to false. This loop is handy for iterating over arrays and for sequential processing. While, executes a block repeatedly until a specified expression evaluates to false. Less compact version of another iteration statement. Do while, executes a block repeatedly until a specified expression evaluates to false, but is always executed once before the conditional expression is evaluated. For each statement used to iterate through every element in an array or collection should not be used to change the contents of the collection to avoid unpredictable side effects. If else, a selection statement that identifies which block of code to run based on the value of a Boolean expression. Switch, a selection statement that transfers control to the case section whose label contains a constant value that matches the value of the expression evaluated. Parameter, used to pass values or variable references into a method. Argument, the value of the parameter passed to a method. Overloading, using the same name for multiple class methods within the same class but with different parameters. When you have two methods with the same name but different signatures. Array, a data structure that contains several variables of the same type. Can be single dimensional, multi-dimensional, or jagged. Inheritance, a characteristic of OOP that allows the creation of new classes that reuse, extend, and modify the behavior that is defined in other classes, implemented with a colon followed by the parent class. In other words, public class B, colon, A. Encapsulation, a characteristic of OOP that restricts access to class members to prevent users from misusing objects. While hiding the internal functionalities, it allows the class to serve as requests or modify its code to suit changing requirements. In object-oriented programming methodology, prevents access to implementation details. Encapsulation is implemented by using access specifiers. An access specifier defines the scope and visibility of a class member. C# supports the following access specifiers: public, private, protected internal, and protected internal. Polymorphism, a characteristic of OOP that allows objects belonging to different types to respond to method, field, or property calls of the same name, each one according to an appropriate type-specific behavior. Uses the same public interface for different types, such as the money slots. Keyword, name reserved by the compiler that coders are not allowed to use as identifier. Namespace groups classes together so that they have a unique identifier. Assembly, compilation of classes in C# usually ends in .dll or .exe. Expression, A sequence of one or more operands and zero or more operators that can be evaluated to a single value, object, method, or namespace. Operator, symbol which transforms and combines expressions. Object, instance of a type created when a program runs, can be visible or invisible, has properties, events, and methods. Heap, block of memory allocated on the fly when the new operator is called, or with reference data types, in other words, strings. Stack, block of memory allocated when a program is executed, is sequential, LIFO, and used for value data types, in other words, int. Try, catch, finally. An exception handling statement where code is executed in the first block, any exceptions are handled in the second block, and resources are released in the final block. Static, a modifier used to create data and functions that can be accessed without creating an instance of the class. Can be used to separate data and behavior that is independent of any object identity. The data and functions do not change regardless of what happens to the object. Const, a modifier used with a declaration of a field or local variable and specifying the value of which cannot be modified. Abstract, a modifier used in a class declaration to indicate that the class is intended only to be a base class of other classes and cannot be instantiated. Override, a modifier used with a method, a property, an indexer, or an event to create a new implementation of a virtual member inherited from a base class. Must have the same signature. Virtual, a modifier used with a method or property declaration, the implementation of which can be changed by an overriding member in a derived class. When invoked, the runtime type of the object is checked for an overriding member. Interface contains only the signatures of methods, delegates, or events. The implementation of the methods is done in the class that implements the interface. Is a contract. Indexer allows an instance of a class or struct to behave like an array. Resembles a property except that its successors take parameters, defined with this and value keywords. Generic, a way to create a collection that is type safe at compile time, as opposed to casting types to and from the universal base type object, defined with a T. Collection, a specialized class for data storage and retrieval. Provides support for stacks, queues, lists, and hash tables, increased type safety, and better performance. Example is a list, array list, dictionary. Struct, a value type that can behave like a class but is instantiated on the stack, is lightweight and is passed by value instead of reference. A value type that is typically used to encapsulate small groups of related variables, such as the coordinates of a rectangle or the characteristics of an item in an inventory. Void, the return type for a method that does not return a value. Int, a value type with a range of negative 2.1 billion to 2.1 billion. Bool, a value type that evaluates to true or false. Byte, a value type with a range of 0 to 255. Char, a value type that represents a Unicode character. Decimal, a 128-bit value data type with great precision and a range which makes it appropriate for financial and monetary calculations. Double, a value type that stores 64-bit floating point values. Enum, a value type consisting of a set of named constants. By default, the first element has the int value 0, and each successor is increased by 1. Var, an implicit type. It aliases any type in the C-sharp programming languages. The alias type is determined by the C-sharp compiler. This has no performance penalty. Parse, a method used to convert data from one type to another. Float, a value type that stores 32-bit floating point values. Sealed, a modifier that prevents other classes from inheriting from the modified class. Singleton, a class pattern that creates a single instance of itself, allows other objects to access this instant through a class method that returns a reference to the instance, declares the class constructor is private so that no other object can create a new instance. Example is mouse pointer. Is, an operator that checks if an object is compatible with a given type, evaluates to false if the object is not convertible, but does not perform conversion. As, an operator that is used to perform certain types of conversions between compatible reference or nullable types. Acts like a cast operation. However, if the conversion is not possible, it returns null instead of raising an exception. Boxing, the implicit process where the CLR wraps a value type inside a system object and stores it on the managed heap. Factory, an object for creating other objects. It is an abstraction of a constructor and typically has a method for every kind of object it is capable of creating. These methods optionally accept parameters defining how the object is created and then return the created object. Attribute, a powerful method of associating metadata or declarative information with code. In other words, assemblies, types, methods, properties, and so forth. Reflection dynamically creates an instance of a type, binds the type to an existing object, or gets the type from an existing object and invokes its method, or accesses its fields and properties, enables you to access attributes. The ability of a managed code to read its own metadata for the purpose of finding assemblies, modules, and type information at runtime. Delegate, a reference type variable that holds the reference to a method. The reference can be changed at runtime. Delegates are especially used for implementing events and the callback methods. All delegates are implicitly derived from the system.delegate class. Syntax error. Error when setting a property or typing a line of code. Logic error. A bug in a program that causes it to operate incorrectly but not to terminate abnormally or crash. A logic error produces unintended or undesired output or other behavior, although it may not immediately be recognized as such. Task Parallel Library. TPL is a set of public types and APIs in the system threading and system threading task namespaces. The purpose of the TPL is to make developers more productive by simplifying the process of adding parallelism and concurrency to applications.